My name is Lou Klatt, and I am reaching out today to Kirstin Valdez Quade, who is currently in a residency at the James Merrill House, beautiful James Merrill House in Stonington, Connecticut. She's the author of two books, Night at the Fiestas, a collection of short stories, and the about to be released novel, The Five Wounds, both books from W.W. Norton. And Kirsten is no stranger to the Festival of Faith and Writing, having presented there in 2016. So welcome, Kirsten.
Thanks, Lou. It's good to see you. It's such a joy to be here with you.
So we're going to talk about publishing today. And so I wanted to start out by asking you, how do you break into the publishing world with your stories? Can you tell me about your experience?
Sure. So my first publication was in graduate school, and my teacher submitted one of my stories to the AWP Intro Awards, which is, I don't know if they still do those, but it's open to students who are in MFA programs. And it won one of the prizes and was published in the Colorado Review. And I was in there with you, Lou.
Yes. Who knew?
Who knew? Then? Who knew that our paths would cross?
Amazing. Yeah. And what did that feel like?
It was amazing. I still remember, I didn't feel ready to publish at that point. I was in graduate school, and I was really focused on, learning the craft and revising stories and figuring out what is my project? What is my subject matter? Do I have a voice? And so those were really the big questions that were concerning me. So it felt like a surprise, again, because, my teacher just said, every year we're asked to submit some stories for various things, and can we submit yours for this? And I said, sure. But I do remember when that journal arrived, and it was astonishing to hold a journal that contained something I'd written. It was a thrill.
Yeah. That has certainly been the case for me. I mean, I just think seeing something in print is absolutely the best thing ever.
Yeah, and it's scary too, because, my stories are in flux for so long, and, I spend years revising, and suddenly it's done. And it's scary, because then, at that point, at least for a while, if it goes into a collection, then you have another shot at revision. But at least for a while, that's the story.
Yeah.
But it also means that I can move on and focus on other stories that are still in progress.
Yeah. That's a neglected blessing, right? Of putting something into print, right? That you can start to move on in a way. Otherwise, you could be sort of endlessly caught in that loop of trying to revise.
And I definitely get caught in that loop.
Yeah. Well, you've published many places since then. What I want to ask, what's the role of the agent in getting your work published? And I'm asking this mainly as someone outside the fiction world. Most poets don't have agents. They might have speakers bureaus, but they often don't have agents to represent them. So we kind of go in, right through the submission portal. But how about yourself? What's been the role of the agent in getting your work published?
Well, my first few publications were without an agent. I was submitting stories on my own for several years before I had an agent. And for stories, that's absolutely doable. I think it can be really helpful at journals like the Paris Review and the New Yorker to have an agent, because often those agents have relationships with some of the editors, and and I think it's possible that editors take a closer look at agented work. At least that's my impression. But I have a friend who got, I think, his first or second or an early story in the Paris Review without an agent. My first story in the New Yorker was without an agent. So it's by no means necessary. An agent becomes really necessary when the time comes to sell a book to a publishing house. That's when things become really, really important.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's more than one way in when you are submitting stories. How does if a young writer wanted to make that happen, to get an agent? Any suggestions about that, especially if they're not so published yet?
I mean, I guess my advice would depend on whether a young writer had a manuscript that was ready to sell, a full manuscript. I think at that point, then you do want to take it seriously, and you look, really good start is to look in the acknowledgments of books you admire, books that have just come out. Yeah, I mean, I think that because the individual writer has an idea of which other writers are similar in the same family to them. So it can be really useful to look at those published writers and see, who's representing them, who's interested in this kind of work. I don't, sometimes my graduate students feel this real urgency around getting an agent and starting the professional part of the path. And I tell my students that, maybe spend time, just developing your relationship with the work for a while. Like, don't be in such a hurry to do that, to start the professional part. And because again, you can submit stories on your own, but my advice is very different. If you've got a completed collection, if you've got a completed novel, if you have a bunch of stories out there, then that's a good time to query agents. I mean, I don't know, because I'm not an agent, but I suspect that when agents receive query letters, they're looking at publication lists to see, is this a writer who is, serious in sending things out?
Yeah, and recognized for their work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think we live in an era, right, when people, I think this current generation doesn't seem to have the same sort of pay your dues kind of mentality, and I think that's liberating and refreshing in many ways. But this sort of self-declaration, I am, I'm ready to go. Publish me, give me the agent. I'm ready to be a professional. May get in the way of some of the work. Is that how you feel, or do you feel differently?
Well, I would just want for my students to have space to really develop their work without some of those professional pressures. I do think writing has become increasingly professionalized. There are so many MFA programs. There's so many, you know, workshops and seminars for how to get published. And of course, we all want to get published. We're not writing for ourselves. Most of us, we do want our work out there. And so, and I don't know, I mean, maybe social media has contributed to this, this pressure that I think young writers can feel. This is just one take, but I was slow to start that part of things, slow to send things out, slow to get an agent. And I feel really, really grateful for those years when I didn't feel the pressure of outside voices, outside judgment, where I really was just trying to make my stories better and figure out who I am as a writer. Of course, I'm still figuring that out. We never stop that. But I do, sometimes I have, a freshman who's like, how do I get an agent? And I just want, I get where that pressure comes from, but I want for them to have space where they're not worried about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's something about the art itself that's so generative.
Mm.
And but the obsession with the end product, which you have to have some ambition, right? But that obsession about the end product can really sort of corrode that joy and love.
And also the worries about what's selling and what's marketable. I would want my students to be focused on discovering which stories are urgent for them to tell.
Mm.
And I think you do need some time to figure that out.
Yeah.
I mean, but of course, I don't want to be a Pollyanna about it. Of course, we do have to think about what readers are interested in, and but I think I just wouldn't want that other part, the discovery and the space to be lost.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying about having to focus on audience and what what the current audience, so you can't be ignorant of that. But the focus may be in a different direction. I thought this is an interesting comment that you said that you have to write what's urgent for you. Is that true for you? I mean, what do you feel that compulsion to, even if something's maybe, I don't know, if you don't feel like there's even a market for it, do you find yourself writing those kinds of things?
Oh, absolutely. I'm working on a project now, which, it's still too early to talk about, but I don't see there being an obvious market for it. It's a little weird, and but it feels really interesting to me, and I'm really glad that it does, and so I'm going to go with it. And maybe it won't sell at all. Who knows?
Yeah, and that who knows part I think is really important too, right? I mean, I think this idea of trying to manage the future and manage the end seems, I don't know, a fool's errand on some level, right? To think that we can control all that. But I don't know. Maybe there are people who really do know how to game the system.
Well, then we should be talking to them.
That's right.
Learning.
That's right. So, do you have a publishing strategy? This master plan, right?
Gosh, Lou, when you invited me to be a part of this interview and to talk about publishing, I was sort of worried because I don't really have a master plan. I mean, my plan for my life, my goal for my writing life is to keep on doing it. To have a life where I do have space to continue to read and write. And, because I'm a teacher and a professor, then publication is part of that. But right. that's how I get to, buy the space to do that. I don't have a master plan, though.
I think our audience would be surprised to hear that. I mean, given that you've been pretty successful, right? I think if one looks from the outside, one looks at your CV and says, "Oh, well, she's charting her path." But more, that's kind of that's kind of an after the fact sort of appraisal of your career, right?
Well, I mean, maybe then the plan is to, just keep working on it in the face of rejection, because that's a humongous part of it. And I do try to, of course I have feelings about rejection and publication. Both of those things, I feel disappointed and I feel happy. But I really do try to separate that from the experience of sitting down in front of my computer and writing.
So you compartmentalize.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, a little bit. I'm also, I think one of the reasons I wasn't sure I was the best person for you to talk to is that the publication stuff, I don't feel I really understand. And I do understand how to keep writing. I do understand how to keep revising. That stuff makes sense to me. Even when I don't know exactly what to do to make something better, I know that I have to keep chipping away.
Yeah. Actually, I think that makes you very qualified to be a part of this interview, because I think people can relate to that. And I think, the fact that you've been, that you're with Norton, and you've been in the New Yorker and Plowshares and, the Southern Review and these kinds of places. I think the perception might be that, yeah, you really do sort of, know what you're doing when it comes to publishing. I think it's kind of liberating to hear that you're not really sure. And that what you do focus on is what you can control most of all, and what you care the most about, which is the writing and the work of the imagination.
Yeah, and there's the other part where, of course, I do want to hold that journal that has my story in it. So it's both. It's both.
Yeah, it's a both and. Yeah. Let me ask you this. How do you determine if a piece of fiction should see the light of day? I mean, how do you know when you're ready to send something out?
So I think that there are two kinds of writers. Some send things out quickly and a lot, and some hang on to manuscripts for a really long time. And I am someone who sits on things for years. I mean, a lot of years. And that, that's something that I'm trying to get better about. I'm trying to be braver about sending work out. I have readers I really trust, and so I send work to readers. I revise myself. I let things sit. I come back and revise them, and really, I send things out when I've done everything I can, when I've responded to the readers' comments as best I can, and I've gotten it as far as I can get it. Then I send it out. And when things are rejected, then I have this new sort of rush. Maybe the editor will have given me a couple comments about how to make it better. And then I have this renewed excitement about the draft, and I revise it again and then send it out. I do think, these rejections can be really, really helpful. I mean, the first story in my collection is the story called Nemesia, and I sent that to an editor, and he said, it's not for us, but your story ends here. And he put his finger on an image 2/3 of the way through the story, and he was exactly right. I cut away everything after that image, and I sent it out again, and not terribly long after it was accepted. So whether you get feedback from an editor or not, I find that each time I get rejected, I look at the piece with new eyes.
Yeah. And so that's another maybe neglected sort of blessing of sending work out, is even in the rejection, right? It does allow you to see your work from a different perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, even just getting something ready to read, the public reading, you suddenly start seeing it from the point of view of this imagined audience, or from this editor, and boy, that's the place where the sentences get sharper.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that yeah? So maybe you've already answered this. Do you ever find yourself censoring your work when you realize you're going to show it to a particular, I don't know, editor or send it to a particular magazine?
Censoring.
Censor it in terms of, well, that's going to be a little revealing, or that's too risky. I don't know, aesthetically or something like that. I just wondered about that. Does that ever factor into your calculations, and what do you do with that? I'm basically confessing my own sort of misgiving sometimes I have when it's time to, when I think, oh, I'm going to send this out, and then I start to look at it and I go, oh, shoot, do I really want to expose myself that way?
I absolutely have had that experience of writing something and thinking, my God, I don't want anyone to know that came out of my brain. And, but I find that when I have that reaction, there's something interesting there. And more often than not, that something is working, even if it leaves me feeling embarrassed and exposed. Again, because I hang on to drafts for so long, by the time I am ready to send things out or send a story out, I've pretty much forgotten that thing once embarrassed me, or it just has less power than it once did at that point, because I've gone over it and over it and over it.
Yeah. And you have some distance, and maybe you've been able to answer some of the questions that maybe you had about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, by the time I send it out, other readers have seen it. So if there's something I'm really unsure about, often I've asked them.
Yeah.
And either taken it out or not.
Right.
But I don't take out paragraphs because it's going to a certain editor. I've never done that.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: your best experience in seeking publication, or perhaps maybe your worst?
Well, okay, I'll tell you. So I guess I wasn't quite truthful in the beginning when I told you about my first publication in the Colorado Review, because actually my first publication
That's why I want to get to the truth.
was my grandmother called me one day and said, "Oh, mijita, you'll be so happy. I met a writer at Mass. And she and I showed her your beautiful story." And I said, "Oh," and it turned out the beautiful story was my college application essay that I wrote when I was, I just turned 17.
Mm.
And I'd sent her a copy of it because it's about her and I thought she'd like it. And I was sort of embarrassed to hear that she'd shared this with anybody. I was in graduate school at the time and, trying to be a serious writer. And about a year later, I was visiting her and she said, "You won't believe what came in the mail." And this woman had included my essay in this sort of inspirational, it was about going to Mass with my grandmother and that experience and how important that experience has been to me, or was to me I was 17 when I wrote it. And yeah, this woman had included it in this collection of inspirational testimonials about the healing power of the Virgin Mary. And so, yeah, that was not my favorite publication experience. Mostly because
was without your permission.
It was without my permission. I wasn't, I wasn't really credited with it for it. And it was this funny position where I was so mad at my grandmother, and also she really thought she was doing me a solid. She knew that I wanted to be published, and she got me published. So that's that. But it's unfindable because my name is not in it.
So you're okay.
Yeah, well.
but clearly scarred.
Yeah, clearly scarred.
You talked about a lot of different things. Maybe go back to this question of something that's said in academia a lot, and that is publish or perish. And I wonder to what extent that's true for you, or maybe it's not true at all. So I wonder what sort of, maybe I'm trying to get at what motivates you most of all in trying to get published.
Well, I mean, okay, so in your question, you use that term publish or perish, and that comes out of academia, and I am in academia. I have a teaching position, and I do need to continue to publish to keep my job. And so, there is this definite external pressure that, that's part of it. I love teaching. I love teaching writing. I want to keep doing that. I also, the question of what motivates me is, so there is that, and then there's the sort of, ego thrill of seeing a story of mine in a journal, and holding that thing. And that's a part of it too. But the main part of it, the thing that really keeps me going is that I get invested in my characters and I'm curious about them and I want to see how things pan out for them. That's really what keeps me going over the length of the story, or now my new novel.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to see them through, and the longer I spend with them, the more invested I am in them, and you know, there's this funny way in which I sort of feel like I owe it to them to finish the thing.
Yeah.
But as a reader, it's from the time I was little, it's meant so much to me to read and to have that relationship with a writer that stretches over space and time. It's a magical thing
Hmm.
to feel that connection with somebody I've never met and will never meet, and who, maybe inhabited a completely different world than I could ever inhabit. And, so that's part of it too. I I do want to reach out to this, and this reader who I may never meet.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, right? That you may never meet them, but you have met them through this medium of language.
Yeah, I mean, think about how close we can feel to writers who, are maybe long dead.
Hmm.
It's this real intimacy.
Yeah.
And of course it's not, what do I know? What who that person really was, but it's this version of the writer.
Yeah. Yeah. In some cases, maybe the best version of themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a wonderful thought, and maybe a wonderful thought to end on.